Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We try to check out and dive deeply into great theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, things that you can hang your hat on, things that you can, rely upon and believe in for every aspect of your life. Things that are not going to let you down, they're not going to pull the rug out from under you. Grand unified theories, magnum opuses and tour de forces, earth-shattering discoveries from obscure sources. And we hope that this will help you with your personal edification, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health, your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, and your formation of a holistic worldview. Today's our 182nd video that we've done on what I call the Reciprocal Church unit. And this is all about putting together spiritual resources that we can use in our lives, that we can believe in as our, as we become red-pilled, and as we realize that all of the religions that have been presented to us are lying to us, propagandizing us, and even mocking us. And especially this is true of the Bible, and we're dealing with the New Testament right now. We'll get to the Old Testament later. And this is no type of negative, condemnation of Christianity. I think it is a mixed bag. I would call it a limited hangout. There's some beautiful stuff in there, but ultimately, in my opinion, from studying the historical evidence, I see that it was clearly, the New Testament was clearly written by the Romans, the Caesars, certainly Titus Caesar from 79 to 81 AD, possibly his father Vespasian from 69 to 79 AD, definitely his brother Vespasian from 81 to 96 AD. This is the Flavian dynasty of the Caesars, and part of that dynasty, a member of the court, and really the court historian for the Flavians was a fellow named Josephus, who was a Jew, who was a Jewish priest, and eventually became one of the commanders of the Jewish army in 66 AD, when they were fighting against the Romans, revolting against Roman occupation. And Josephus eventually surrendered and had an epiphany, he says, that he recognized that God is no longer on the side of the Jews. God now favors the Romans. And he defected to the Romans. And he gave Vespasian, who was the military general at that time for the Romans, gave him the star prophecy, saying that I foresee in the future that you will one day become emperor. And not too long thereafter, Emperor Nero committed suicide, and there were 3 other emperors that reigned for very short periods, named Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. And then Vespasian was tapped to be emperor. And when he did so, he rewarded Josephus by adopting him as his son. Josephus Flavianus of the Flavian dynasty. And you may know of Josephus because if you're a Christian, you know of him because he's the guy, he's the only guy in the first century that wrote about Jesus. He's the only evidence, that historical evidence that exists outside of the Bible of the existence of Jesus. But he was also an agent of Rome. And if you read his book, War of the Jews, 7 volumes, he also wrote Antiquities of the Jews in 20 volumes later on. War of the Jews about 75 to 80 AD, and Antiquities in the early 90s. And he had an autobiography also. And that testimonium, the part that he talks about Jesus in just an offhanded paragraph, is in the Jewish Antiquities from about early 90s AD. But if you do look at especially War of the Jews, you can see its unmistakable parallels to the Gospels in particular, and some of the other parts of the Bible as well. But I would say mostly from the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and a little bit of John as well. I think when Domitian came in after Titus, I think he redacted some stuff or moved around some stuff in John, and then he wrote the rest of it. He wrote the Pauline epistles, or they might have already been written, and he redacted those, and definitely wrote Revelation and Acts. But we will be proving that here coming up. But basically, it's a typology. If you look at the War of the Jews, which is supposed to be a history, Emperor Titus endorsed it. Titus was the military general after Vespasian became emperor. Titus's son took over as the military general. He eventually also became emperor. And Titus sings the praises of Josephus for his great history of the War of the Jews. This is supposed to be a history. It's supposed to have really happened. Now, the Bible doesn't claim that. It's more of a religious document. But if you read them side by side, you'll see that in a plethora of instances, Jesus says something metaphorically. Jesus has a three-year ministry. Titus has a 3-year military campaign. They go from place to place, and wherever Jesus goes, Titus goes. They go to the same places, and at the same places engage in the same events, except that it's a satire of one is the satire of the other. And so when Jesus goes to one place, goes to Sea of Galilee, before his ministry started, and he meets Simon and Andrew, and he says, "You will become fishers of men." He says it as a metaphor, as a symbolic thing. You're going to be like, helping me move people into my movement, into my ministry. But the prophecies that Jesus makes are fulfilled in War of the Jews by Titus, literally. So then you flash forward to the War of the Jews, and Titus is fighting a military campaign at the same spot where Jesus said, "I'm going to make you fishers of men," and he literally makes his men fishers of men of all these Jews that they have to pull out of the water and either chop their heads off or spear them during this war. So literally, Titus makes his men become fishers of men. And on and on and on. It goes on. A ton of different examples of the same thing, of Jesus saying something metaphorically and it being fulfilled literally by Titus. And then they also put it so that the prophecies that Jesus says that in terms of his second coming, those are fulfilled by Titus. And so I'm warning the Christians that if you think that you're worshiping Jesus, you are actually worshiping Titus. They're mocking you, and it needs to stop. But that's what's going on. They tricked you for the last 1950 years into worshiping the Caesars when you thought you were worshiping Jesus. Everything that you're waiting for in Revelation to happen, because Jesus predicted it, it already happened, and it was written down in the War of the Jews by Josephus, who is an agent and a family member of the Flavian Caesar dynasty. So we're going to be trying to decode the New Testament. We're going to start out with the book of Luke, using a lot of this Caesar stuff. That a lot of it comes from the work of Joseph Atwill, also Michael Menescatz, and several others. And then we're also going to be using other ciphers to try to decode the New Testament. Another important one is the Dead Sea Scrolls, especially given that Josephus has now been pretty much discredited, and the Gospels. There is really no authoritative source on the first century. In steps the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were discovered in the mid-20th century near Jerusalem, 20 miles, Qumran. And they shed a great deal of light on the Gospels. The language that is spoken by this sect, this group of very strict Jews that lived there, echoes or prefigures much of the language in the Gospels, and it also helps us to kind of understand what they're saying, because there's a jargon there. It's kind of like, I saw an example from a guy named Patterson talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and kind of just the method that the Jews use. This intertextual, where they're referring from one text to the other. You have to have read the other text to understand what they're saying here. Well, it's the same with like popular culture. And he used the example of like Luke Skywalker. You can refer to Luke Skywalker, and everybody knows what you're talking about. But if you don't know what you're talking about, then you're thinking Skywalker. You don't, if you don't have the social context for that, then you're lost and you don't get what's being said. It's kind of the same type of thing that's going on here, especially in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And another important thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls is that they were basically buried for like 50 years after they were discovered, 40 years, 45 years after they were discovered, because they were assigned to a international team of so-called scholars to translate them from the Hebrew, or sometimes Aramaic or Greek, into English or whatever Western language. And the Catholic priests that were on the international team that dominated the team, they didn't like what they saw when they started reading them, and so they started to just obfuscate and just pretend like they were putting out stuff when they really weren't putting out important stuff. And all of the powerful stuff that was in the Dead Sea Scrolls pretty much had to wait until the early 1990s to see the light of day. And one of the scholars that was instrumental in breaking up the log jam, so to speak, was Robert Eisenman. And we're taking a look at his book here that is called Maccabees, Zadokites, Christians, and Qumran, which is about the Dead Sea Scrolls in particular. His take on them, because he's gone over them in detail, and he's also not only a Hebrew scholar, ancient Jewish scholar, but also an Islamic scholar. And he, I think, more than just about anybody, in my opinion, which may be not worth that much, seems to have really digested this stuff and tried to make the comparisons with what's written in the Gospels and try to really figure out what are they talking about. Okay, so we're about to start chapter 2. It's called the Zadokite Priesthood. The Dead Sea Scrolls have delineated what a Zadokite priesthood has to have been from the 2nd century BC onwards. Though there might be a genealogical component to this conception, its main thrust is qualitative, namely those who keep the covenant or follow the law. Primarily, the Zadokite priesthood must relate, as the Zadokite document explicitly denotes, to the book of Ezekiel, where it was first introduced. And if you don't remember, the Zadok was the priest for David, I believe, and then his heirs were the Zadoks. In Ezekiel, the priests, who are the Bray Zadok, B'nai Zadok, B-N-E-I, Zadok, Levites, kept charge of my sanctuary, kept the covenant, while, quote, the sons of Israel went astray from me. That there may be a genealogical connotation to this description is self-evident. However, it is also clear from studying Ezekiel's account that there are other priestly Levites, members of families as respectable as Shaphans, these comprising the former reigning priestly aristocracy, doubtless could have made equally legitimate Zadokite claims, and are now being disqualified on the basis of their idolatry, etc., from service in the temple. The Dead Sea Scrolls further emphasize the ethical aspect of Ezekiel's usage. As they employ this terminology, it definitely has a component in, quote, righteousness, which is, of course, the root of the personal noun Zadok. That's Zadok, Z-A-D-O-K. Or in observation of the law. It cannot be stressed too strongly that this moral component is the absolute determinant of a proper Zadokite priest, at least as far as the Zadokite document is concerned, and probably Ezekiel as well. I'm not completely clear what the Zadokite document is. I don't know if that's part of the Dead Sea Scrolls or if that's way back in the Old Testament when they were talking about David. So if you know, let me know. We'll try to figure it out as we move along. The play on words implicit in this esoteric analysis of the term constitutes a favorite device at Qumran. The artful craftsmanship practiced there is missed on many Qumran scholars who do not adequately come to grips with literary devices in such an environment. This play on words is reinforced in the conjunction of the Moreh HaZadok with the son of Zadok, or more precisely, the Zadok par excellence. It is extended even further in the Pesharim, which I think is just the Pesher, which is kind of like this kind of intertextual reading that reveals, coded secrets, where the identification is always consciously and explicitly drawn between the Zadok, that's Z-A-D-D-I-K, in the text, and the Moreh HaZadok, Z-E-D-E-K, in the exegesis. What would be Jesus' relationship to the kind of ideology we are developing here? According to perhaps the oldest and probably most Jewish stratum of New Testament Christology, Jesus was the suffering just one, therefore the suffering Zadok, and is specifically so designated in Acts. He doesn't give a citation there, but maybe he will later. The origin of this phraseology is the suffering servant simile of Isaiah 53. Here, it should be noted, not only is the servant identified with the Zadok, but his justifying action is to be accomplished by his knowledge and his carnal nefesh. I thought that was serpent nefesh. Okay, this Yazdic Zadok theology of Isaiah 53 is not only recognizable in the Pauline corpus, it is also present in the Zadokite document and the Qumran hymns. By extension, it is also present in recognizably parallel fashion in the Habakkuk Pesher and the letter of James. However, Paul parts companies with these on whether this justification is to be achieved by faith or through works of righteousness and the law, according to the esoteric interpretation of the Zadokite priesthood as we have expounded it. Since Jesus was Zadok, to his heirs belong the high priesthood. The wordplay we have already signaled is further extended in the letter to the Hebrews with the allusion to, quote, the priesthood after the order of Melchizedek. The reference here is not only to the concept of righteousness as being the primary basis of legitimacy in the succession, but also to the personality of the righteous priest, King Jesus, in whose name the new order is established. Here, it should not be forgotten that the title, the Zadok, was also accorded to Jesus' brother James, who was on this basis, in addition to being Jesus' genealogical successor, his spiritual heir. Early church literature, whether through overenthusiasm or otherwise, depicted James as having worn the breastplate of the high priest and actually entering the Holy of Holies. Whether this priesthood of Jesus and James was also the Zadokite one is debatable. In terms of the analysis we have presented of righteousness, or the righteous one, being the basis for the esoteric understanding of Ezekiel's prognoses, it was. Through this analysis also, sense can be made of the testimony referred to above of James actually functioning as high priest. Whether the Maccabean priesthood of the Most High God is also to be identified with the Melchizedek one of Christianity and the letter to the Hebrews remains open to question. Whether this latter usage of the term can be extended to the Qumran use of the term as well has been debated. The writer would take a position in the affirmative, considering all such juxtapositions of the letters Z, D, K to be interrelated. In this regard, it should be remembered that the formula men of the lot of Melchizedek of 11, I don't know. I'm not sure what that, 11Q, I guess that's Qumran. 11Q Melchizedek corresponds almost precisely to the terminology sons of Zadok in the Zadokite document, and therefore by simple reduction, Zadok and Melchizedek are equivalent usages. Just wanted to comment from before. So both Eisenman and Barbara Thiering, who I don't know if Eisenman has ever mentioned her, and I'm not sure her work was much earlier, and I'm not sure it's very thorough in terms of breaking down the kind of the floor plan and the map of and the customs of the people of Qumran. But both of them bring in a lot of credence to James. Um, Eisenman has a book called James, the Brother of Jesus, and in Thiering's approach, she says that Jesus, since they said that Joseph may put Mary away, that implies that Jesus was an illegitimate child. And so her whole take is that this isn't about the Son of God, it's really about the King of the Jews, and that Jesus was really the heir of, David. And there is that genealogy, two genealogies to that effect. In the same Gospels that bring up the virgin birth, they both have the virgin birth, but then they both have the genealogies connecting Jesus to David. So which is it? But James is seen as being the rightful heir in some cases, under some of the high priests in Jerusalem. They've accorded this to James, some to Jesus, depending on how you see his legitimacy. And so that was kind of what a lot of the thrust of the Gospels, according to Thiering, is that who is the rightful heir here? Is it Jesus or is it James? And then, when Jesus is crucified, he's brought down by James alive. And so, according to Thiering, Jesus survives the crucifixion. It's not a resurrection per se, it was a escape. And she contends that crucifixion is not a slow-acting torture. It takes days and days for it to kill you. And according to the Gospels, I believe Jesus is only up on the cross for like half a day. So they brought him down and they brought him back to, back to life, basically. Moving on. Finally, if there is substance to any of these extensions and identifications, the priesthood after the order of Melchizedek must be related to what we have called the zealot, based on the zeal of Phineas, and invoked on behalf of Simeon the righteous, Mattathias, and Onias in the Hebrew version of Ecclesiasticus, also 1st Maccabees and 2nd Maccabees respectively. And those are all, I believe, apocryphal Old Testament works. Correspondingly, J. Bowman has argued in a much overlooked article on this subject that the Zadokite one bases its claims for legitimacy on this self-same covenant of Phineas, so which is the zeal thing. By now, it should be clear that these are not all separate reckonings, but rather esoteric or poetic variations around the same theme, righteousness and or zeal, just as the various phraseologies the community at Qumran used to refer to itself, such as sons of light, sons of truth, sons of Zadok, sons of Zedek, sons of Hesed, Ebionim, the elect of righteousness, the meek, Ebioni Hesed, the poor ones of piety, is that means, and Nimharai Zedek, the zealous for righteousness. Also Tammany Derek, the perfect of the way, and Ansha Tamim HaKodesh, the men of perfection of holiness. These are all terms that the Qumran community referred to themselves as. All these phrases do not all designate different groups, but function as interchangeable metaphors. In this view, the covenant of Phineas operated over and above the general Aaronite one, setting forth which among the various Aaronite heirs could be considered suitable candidates for the high priesthood, i.e., the zealous or righteous ones. It is significant that one of the original demands at the time of the first uprising in 4 BC, inspired according to Josephus by the zealots, was to appoint, according to the law, a high priest of more perfect purity. For their part, it was the messianically inspired zealous young priest who, by stopping sacrifice on behalf of the Romans, gave the signal for the start of the uprising in 66 AD. Commentators who cannot make a determination as to whether the Dead Sea Scrolls sect was anti-Herodian or pro-Herodian, pro-Hyrcanus or pro-Aristobulus, and consequently are unable, for instance, to make any sense of out of the destruction of the community in the 40s or 30s BCE by fire, are equally unable to understand any of the considerations delineated above, or rather simply do not wish to, preferring to take a position on the relatively safer and less controversial questions of paleography or archaeology. Okay, that's the end of the chapter. The next one is called Ecclesiasticus and Priestly Legitimacy. I think this will get going eventually, but if it doesn't, we will figure out another approach. But, you know, he gets into a lot of detail, but, you know, if we can keep in mind the major points, I think he's going to help us with our decoding, because he's giving us kind of hints about what this various language means. And in particular here, he's really just saying that, you know, all of these different terms, the poor, the meek, the sons of righteousness, the sons of truth, the sons of light, the perfect of the way, all of these things are referring to the same thing. And I think that is something that is very actually underrated in this biblical decode, is that there is a great deal of redundancy. A lot of terms, you know, like for the high priest, you can call it Zadok, you can call it Archangel Michael, you can call it, there's another term there too. So, you know, there's several terms for like each thing. Okay, we're going to stop right there and tune in tomorrow where we check out chapter 3. Thanks for tuning in today.